Claire's fingers tapped restlessly against the surface of her desk, the rhythmic motion reflecting the buzz of her mind. It was 7:45 p.m., and she was the last one left at the office. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting a cold, sterile glow over the workspace. The hum of her computer was the only sound that accompanied her as she scanned through the final draft of the project she'd been obsessing over for weeks. It was nearly done, everything was nearly perfect, but there was a lingering unease within her, something that had been gnawing at her for days. Her mind wandered. Her marriage to Ethan had been dull for far too long. It wasn't that he was a bad person, quite the opposite, actually. Ethan was steady, dependable, a man who provided the life she had always dreamed of. But somewhere along the way, they had both gotten lost in the routine of their day-to-day existence. The passion that once filled their relationship had withered, replaced by a kind of comfortable silence that seemed to grow with every passing year. Claire took a deep breath, trying to focus on the task at hand, but the thought of Ethan tugged at her. She could almost hear the soft rustle of his clothes as he shuffled around the house, the gentle murmur of his voice when he'd ask how her day had been. She remembered the early days, the excitement of their first kiss, the joy of shared dreams. It seemed so far removed from where they were now. The idea of change, of reigniting something long forgotten, felt like a distant dream, something she didn't know how to begin chasing. The sound of her phone buzzing on the desk broke her from her thoughts. Claire glanced at the screen and saw a message from Liam, "Happy hour at the Oak? You in?" Her heart skipped a beat. Liam had been her coworker for the past 6 months, and they had quickly formed a bond, one that started with shared frustrations over office politics and morphed into something far more personal. He was intelligent, ambitious, and charismatic, everything Ethan wasn't. Liam made her feel seen in ways that Ethan hadn't for a long time. Their conversations were lighthearted yet meaningful, and Claire found herself looking forward to their brief moments together during lunch breaks or the occasional coffee runs. And now, he was asking her to join him for drinks. She stared at the message for a moment before typing her response, "I'll be there in 30. It was spontaneous, reckless even. She hadn't meant to be so impulsive, but something inside her yearned for the thrill of a night away from the weight of her life. A chance to shed the role of wife and manager and just be herself for a few hours. The idea of being with Liam, of feeling desired and interesting, excited her in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Claire grabbed her jacket and left the office, locking the door behind her. The air outside was crisp, the streets almost empty at this late hour. She caught a cab to the Oak, the pub where she and her colleagues often gathered after work. It wasn't glamorous, but it had a certain charm, a dimly lit, cozy place with worn leather booths and the smell of grilled food hanging in the air. When Claire entered, she immediately spotted Liam at the bar, laughing with a few others. He turned when he saw her, his smile wide and genuine. "Hey, you made it," he called over, his voice warm, pulling her into the moment. Claire felt the tension in her shoulders loosen as she walked over to him. The familiar comfort of his presence settled around her, and she felt her pulse quicken in response to the way he looked at her. She smiled, the lingering worries of her marriage to Ethan fading into the background as she took a seat beside him. They ordered drinks, and the conversation flowed easily. The group around them was light-hearted, teasing each other and laughing, but Claire found herself drawn to Liam in a way she couldn't explain. His attention was unwavering, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was the center of someone's world. As the evening wore on, the alcohol loosened her tongue, and the conversation deepened. "So, what's the deal with you and Ethan?" Liam asked casually, his gaze never leaving hers. It was a harmless question, or so it seemed, but Claire felt a flicker of discomfort pass through her. "He's fine," she replied, taking a sip of her drink. "We're comfortable, I guess. You know how it is." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable?" Is that it? Don't you want more than that? Claire's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected him to press. It was as if he could see through the carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself. I don't know, she murmured, glancing away. Maybe. It's just, life's busy, you know? Between work, the house, everything, it's hard to make time for anything else. You deserve more than just getting by, Liam said softly, his voice almost too intimate. He leaned in, his presence overwhelming, and for a moment, Claire felt her breath catch in her throat. I don't know what I want anymore, she whispered, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. Before she could say anything else, one of her colleagues interrupted, pulling her back into the group. But the moment lingered, its weight heavy on her mind. Claire excused herself to the bathroom, the cool tile of the sink offering a moment of clarity as she stared at her reflection. Was this what she wanted? A life where she was constantly yearning for something more, something that wasn't with Ethan? When she returned to the bar, the conversation had shifted, but the tension between her and Liam was palpable. As the night wore on, she found herself laughing louder, leaning in closer to him, her defenses crumbling bit by bit. And then, it happened. She hadn't meant to say it. The words slipped out in a moment of reckless abandon, a slip of the tongue she would later regret. If it came down to it, she said, looking Liam squarely in the eye, I'd pick you over Ethan. The words hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken implications. Liam's smile faltered, just for a moment, before he recovered. But Claire couldn't take them back. The alcohol had loosened her inhibitions, and now, she couldn't undo what she had just said. She laughed it off, as though it was a joke. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Liam didn't respond immediately, and Claire felt the weight of her own words settling in. Had she gone too far? The silence between them grew thick, and Claire's pulse quickened. She glanced at her phone, checking the time. She had to leave soon, had to go home to Ethan, but the tension in the air was palpable. What had she just done? As the night drew to a close, Claire gathered her things and bid Liam goodbye. But as she stepped out into the cool night air, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Ethan, we need to talk. Her heart sank. The weight of her words, the drunken confession, and the evening's reckless choices were already beginning to feel like a mistake. But it was too late now. Claire stepped into the house, the door creaking softly behind her as she entered the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with silence, a quietness that seemed to stretch on forever. She had hoped to avoid the conversation, to escape the uncomfortable truth of what she had said the night before, but the message from Ethan loomed over her like a dark cloud. We need to talk. Her heart thudded in her chest as she walked toward the living room, where she knew Ethan would be waiting. She hadn't even had time to change out of the dress she wore to the bar, the fabric now feeling too tight around her chest, as though it were a physical manifestation of the guilt that had already begun to settle in. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound she could hear as she stood still for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Ethan was sitting on the couch, his eyes fixed on the television screen, but it was clear he wasn't actually watching it. His body was tense, his posture stiff, and there was an undeniable chill in the air, a distance between them that had never been there before. Claire, he said, his voice low but firm, breaking the silence. She swallowed hard, unsure of where to begin. The weight of her words from the night before hung between them like a barrier she couldn't cross. She had no idea how to make things right, or if she even could. Ethan, she began, her voice faltering. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. He turned his gaze to her, his eyes sharp but filled with something she couldn't quite place, hurt, perhaps, or disappointment. It was the kind of look that made her stomach churn. You didn't mean it? He asked, his voice steady but cold. You didn't mean that you'd choose Liam over me if it came to that? Claire opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain it? It had been a joke. It had been a stupid comment, one that was supposed to be funny in a group of colleagues. But now, standing in front of Ethan, the truth was undeniable. There was a part of her, a dangerous part, that had meant it. A part of her that had felt the excitement of being seen, of being desired by someone who made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She sat down beside him on the couch, keeping a careful distance, as if the space between them could somehow make this conversation easier. Ethan, it's just everything's been so stale lately, she said, struggling to find the right words. I didn't mean it like I'd actually leave you for Liam. I don't know. It was a stupid comment. I was drinking, and Liam makes me feel like I'm important again. Ethan's face tightened at the mention of Liam's name. He didn't say anything at first, just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. It was clear he was trying to process everything, trying to make sense of something that didn't seem to have an easy explanation. You think I don't care about you anymore? Ethan finally spoke, his voice quiet but tinged with frustration. Is that what this is about? You think that I'm just some guy who doesn't appreciate you, who doesn't see you for who you are? Claire's heart ached at his words. She hadn't meant for it to go this far, hadn't expected to hurt him like this. But in some twisted way, she could see the truth in what he was saying. Their relationship had become a series of unspoken routines, a comfortable yet empty existence. She had come to take Ethan for granted, to assume that he would always be there, steady and predictable. And now, it felt like that certainty was slipping through her fingers. No, that's not it, she said quickly, reaching out to touch his arm. I know you care. I know you love me. But, it's been hard. I've been feeling disconnected. I don't know how to explain it. Ethan pulled his arm away, the motion swift and sharp, as though her touch had burned him. Disconnected, he repeated, his voice growing harder. You think I don't feel the same way? You think this is easy for me, Claire? For months, I've been trying to get through to you. I've been here, trying to be the man you want me to be, but it feels like you've already checked out. Like I'm not enough for you anymore. The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Instead, she just sat there, stunned, as Ethan's eyes softened for a brief moment before hardening again. You're right, he said finally, his voice resigned. Things have been off. But instead of talking to me, you go and say something like that. You make a joke about picking someone else, someone who makes you feel wanted. He shook his head slowly. I don't know if I can just forget that, Claire. Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. She had always known that their marriage was in trouble, but she hadn't realized how fragile it had become. She hadn't understood how close they were to breaking until now. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I swear, Ethan. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't want to lose you. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. I don't know if I can believe that anymore, he said, his voice distant, as though he was already preparing himself for the worst. He walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the empty house. Claire's heart hammered in her chest as she watched him. She could see the way his back stiffened, the way his shoulders tensed as he reached for his coat. I'm leaving, Ethan said, his voice cold. I need space, Claire. I need to figure things out. I can't stay here and pretend everything is fine. No, please, Claire pleaded, standing up from the couch. Ethan, please don't leave. I'll fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. But he didn't turn around. Without another word, he opened the door and stepped outside, leaving Claire standing in the doorway, her hands trembling at her sides. The sound of the door closing behind him was deafening. Claire stood there for a long time, her body frozen in place, as the weight of her actions settled in. She had pushed him away, and now she was facing the consequences of her carelessness. She had made a joke out of something that wasn't funny, something that had broken the fragile trust between them. And now, it seemed that there was nothing she could do to fix it. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Liam. "You okay?" She hesitated before typing a reply, "Not really." And for the first time in a long while, Claire realized that the life she had built, her marriage, her sense of stability, was slipping through her fingers. And there was no one left to blame but herself. The morning after Ethan left, Claire felt as though the world had shifted beneath her feet. The quiet that filled the house was suffocating, the silence louder than any argument could have been. She sat at the kitchen table, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling in front of her, her eyes unfocused as she stared out the window. The reality of the night before had settled in with a weight she hadn't been prepared for. Ethan was gone. He had walked out, and she had no idea if he would ever come back. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Ethan. It was Liam. "Do you want to talk? I'm here if you need me." Claire stared at the message for a moment, the words swimming in her mind. She had told herself, just hours ago, that she would focus on fixing things with Ethan, that she would do whatever it took to make it right. But in the pit of her stomach, Claire knew the truth: she had already lost Ethan. She had already crossed a line she couldn't undo. She let the phone sit on the table as her mind replayed the events of the last few days, the words she'd spoken, the way she had ignored the quiet desperation in Ethan's eyes. She had made a choice, and now it was too late to turn back. She had chosen to take the attention and affection of someone else over the person who had stood by her for years. And in the end, it had cost her everything. But the nagging thought of Liam still lingered. He had been there for her in a way Ethan hadn't been for a long time. He had listened when she needed to talk, made her feel seen when she had felt invisible. And now, with Ethan gone, the possibility of something more with Liam seemed almost tempting. Almost comforting. She picked up her phone and typed a quick reply to Liam. "Maybe later. I'm still figuring things out." The message felt hollow even as she sent it. What was she trying to figure out? There was nothing left to figure out. Ethan was gone, and Liam. Liam had always been a distraction, nothing more. She had convinced herself that he was the answer to her dissatisfaction, but the truth was far more painful: she was the problem. She had pushed Ethan away, and now she was left with nothing but the remnants of a relationship that had once meant everything to her. The next few days were a blur. Claire went through the motions, going to work, answering emails, attending meetings, but her mind was never fully present. She missed Ethan in ways she hadn't anticipated. The quiet mornings they had shared, the way he would make her coffee without her asking, the familiar hum of his voice calling her name. She hadn't realized how much she had taken those small moments for granted until they were gone. It was Friday when she finally reached out to Ethan. Her fingers trembled as she typed the message, unsure of what to say or how to say it. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." She stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. The seconds that followed felt like hours as she waited for his response. But it didn't come. Minutes passed. Then hours. And still, no reply. The silence between them was deafening, and the reality hit her harder than she could have imagined: Ethan had moved on. He wasn't coming back. Later that evening, Liam called. His voice was soft, understanding, as if he had been waiting for this moment, this opportunity to step in where Ethan had once been. But Claire didn't want to talk to him. Not right now. Not when she was still grappling with the weight of her own mistakes. She sent a quick text instead. "I'm not ready to talk yet. I'm trying to make things right with Ethan." The truth was, Claire didn't know what she wanted anymore. She had spent so much time focusing on what was missing in her life, trying to find something outside herself to fill the void, that she hadn't seen what she had until it was too late. Ethan had been the constant in her life, the one person who had loved her without question. And now he was gone, taking with him the last shred of certainty Claire had ever known. A week passed, and Ethan's absence became more pronounced with each passing day. His things were still in the house, his clothes hanging in the closet, his books on the shelf. It felt like he might walk through the door at any moment, but the longer she waited, the less likely that seemed. Claire spent her nights in the silence of the empty house, and her mornings were filled with a hollow ache in her chest. She would reach for her phone, thinking of texting him, but each time, she hesitated. She had already crossed the line once, and she didn't know how to bridge the gap between them. She had destroyed the trust they had built over the years with a single careless remark, and now, there was no way back. By the time the second weekend without Ethan passed, Claire had come to a painful conclusion: she had lost him. For good. She hadn't heard from him. And she hadn't heard from Liam either. Claire sat in the living room, the weight of her loneliness sinking in as she watched the empty space where Ethan's chair used to be. The realization hit her like a wave: she had pushed both of them away. Ethan, who had been her rock, had left. And Liam, who had been nothing more than a fleeting distraction, had shown his true colors. He wasn't looking for anything serious. He had his own life, his own path. And Claire was just a temporary indulgence, a way to pass the time. The phone buzzed again, breaking her thoughts. This time, it was from Liam. "I think we both know what we want. Let's not waste any more time." The message made her heart race, but Claire was done. She wasn't ready for another empty connection, not when the real thing had slipped through her fingers. She stared at the screen for a long moment before typing her response. "I've made my choice, Liam. And it's not with you." She hit send, and for the first time in days, she felt a strange sense of peace. The truth had finally settled in, the damage was done. She had lost her marriage, her chance for reconciliation, and the fleeting distraction that Liam had represented. But at least, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from herself anymore. As Claire sat in the silence of her home, she realized that it was time to rebuild. Alone. And maybe, just maybe, this time she would learn to be enough for herself before ever expecting someone else to fill the void.